thank you for joining us for what promises to be both an exciting, stimulating, and very special evening. This could well be entitled Transformational Leadership, because all three of the people that you'll have a chance to see or hear from tonight share a profound commitment to transforming public education in this country. I first want to thank and welcome to the Kennedy School, the Dean of the School of Education here at Harvard, Kathy McCarthy. And for those of you who are students at the school, and many of you I hope know by now that she is undertaking a transformation of that school. She's brought many changes. She's been there since 2006 now. To the school already. It has been exciting. She's had, I happen to have worked on an advisory board that Arnie Duncan was on her advisory board, helping her figure this out. But she just launched a PhD program in educational leadership to help prepare people to become leaders in public school systems and nonprofits and foundations and other kind of organizations that are concerned with that. But she's seen very much on the forefront, and Arnie Duncan has talked to me about her several times at the forefront of school of education across the country. In this new program, with this new PhD program, one of her star teachers, and who's part of the press release and been announced, and many of you, I think, have had the pleasure of knowing. Some of you, I hope, have had her classes, is Stacy Childress. And Stacy is going to be conducting a conversation with our honored guest tonight. But I hope that you know Stacy, both from her work at the Business School and at the School of Education, with her deep interest in social entrepreneurship and in educational reform. She's not only co-authored a casebook, essentially, of educational reform efforts, but she also co-authored an excellent book on Montgomery County in Maryland, and how they were transformational in working with the public schools in that area. So Stacy, welcome. You're great. She's been a great friend of the Reynolds Fellowship Program, by the way. But all of us are coming together tonight, and our prime reason for being here is the generosity of our guest, Joel Klein, in joining us tonight, coming up from New York City. As I think everyone here knows, he has been Chancellor of the public schools in New York City. What, 2002, Joel, is that what it is? Yes. 2002. That's 7 years. Is that the longest tenure now of anyone? Joel is it's the largest urban school district in the country. He will tell you the particulars, but everyone in this nation shares an interest in his success. Because if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Some people say if you're in China, you can do it half the price. But nonetheless, this is the most important educational experiment underway in the country. And Joel has undertaken it, committed his life to it, working with Mayor Bloomberg, who has been a critical player to this. And the mayor just got reelected, as you know, to a third term. We're all waiting to hear how much of that Joel's going to serve, not knowing what his choice would be. Joel grew up in the city of New York, went to schools in the city of New York, went on to Columbia. Magna, came here to Harvard Law School. Magna went on to clerk. And now listen to this, for those of you who know law, clerk for Judge Bazelon, and then he's a proud alumnus of the Lewis Powell clerkship. That was regarded as one of the premier clerkships in the law for a long, long time. And Joel practiced law. He went on to, in the Clinton administration, be the deputy counsel at the White House, where I had the pleasure of working with him, coming to know him, and there were two people in that administration. Joel was one of them that I came away feeling, three actually. These are the people I'd like to know the rest of my life. And be able to have a chance to work with, to be part of what they do, and to be supportive, if possible, of what they represented. Because he did a wonderful job there. He went from the White House over to run the antitrust division at the Justice Department. It was Joel who was a prime force behind bringing the case against Microsoft, which was a brave thing to do. And now Bill Gates is one of his biggest supporters. that I think speaks volumes of what the quality and the integrity and why people respect him so much. I can just tell you that if he had been from Chicago, I think he would have had a choice when Barack Obama were elected, either become Attorney General or the Secretary of Education. We're very proud that he's at in New York City, really doing extraordinarily important work. Joe, we're very honored, sir, that you're here. And we're going to have the two of them are going to have a conversation, and then we'll open this up. And I think you've had a chance to hear who's here. But this is a wonderful cross-section of students. People always show up. I was in the White House yesterday, and my teaching assistant was in meeting with the president. I wasn't meeting with the president. My teaching assistant was. That's the kind of students we have here. So it's good of all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So what we thought we would do, we all know why you're here. You're here to hear from Joel, not to hear me think of smart questions to ask Joel. And so what we'll do is Joel is going to give you a sense of what it's like to be this transformational leader in the middle of change in the largest urban district in the country. And for about 15 or 20 minutes, Joel's just going to tell you what that's like, what that journey's been like, what challenges he's faced, how he's dealt with them. And then we want to get you involved really soon after that, because I'm sure you've all had a very long day sitting in rooms listening to other people talk, and we'll want to hear from you. And what we'll do is begin to get your input and questions, and I have some questions for Joel that I'd like to hear as well. And if they don't come out in the first couple of questions from you, I'll pop in and ask. And we'll just take this for another hour or so and have a good time together, okay? So Joel?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Forgive me if I stand. It's just very hard to be envisioned as a transformational leader while you're sitting there. Well, let me first of all, I want to thank the Dean. I do think what you're doing at that ed school is so important, and the Secretary of Education to point out we need to transform our ed schools if we're going to transform public education, and you're right at the forefront. Stacy is a friend of mine. I'm so proud of the work she's done up here. I've gone to classes with her, but I'm especially proud. When I started an organization called the Education Equality Project, which is a national organization designed to put education as a civil rights issue to the 21st century, it's a highly controversial organization, and very few academics signed up. She didn't even blink, because academics, they don't like controversy. But so I thought it was terrific that she signed on. And I'm worried about my friend David Gergen, and I'll talk a little bit about this. I think that public service and transformational leadership will determine the future of this country. And I think that for a long time, public service took some very, very hard knocks. I taught a class at MIT when I was at the Justice Department. Kid raised his hand and said, "I don't get it." I said, "What don't you get?" He said, "You seem to be very smart. Why would you be in government?" And people like David Gergen have given the better part of his life in a nonpartisan, bipartisan way, because he believes deeply in America and believes that the government of this country determines in significant ways the future of this country. He's a man of extraordinary integrity. He is a deep friend, a man I learned from and stay in contact with. He cares about the right issues. And when he got out of government, instead of being a 24-hour-a-day media junkie, which you can do now, he came up here to work on transformation leadership, put programs like these fellowship programs together, which are so spectacular. And the reason I'm excited, I've done this before, I've met with the fellows in various ways in various places. I believe in this room, the future sits in a microcosm. I believe what you do and how you relate to issues like public service and transformational leadership will decide the future of this country. And I'm going to be blunt about it. I'm not so sure that the future of this country is secure as I would have been 30, 40, 50 years ago. We have enormous challenges, none more so domestically than in the area of education, which is what I wanted to talk to you about and use that as a microcosm. But what I want to focus on is you. And everybody talks about leadership and transformational leadership, but in the end, that's about people. And I want you, when you walk out of here, I have from a guy who was studying at the education school in the urban superintendency program, one of my principals, who I'm now, is an intern with me, Shimon Wonka, here in the front row. And the first question I talked to him about leadership is, I said, unlike the human eye, a real leader has to see as well within as without. And that's what I want you to think about, because I promise you, the future of this nation, future of this world, depends on people willing to lead and to transform. And make no mistake about it, it isn't easy work. So let's take public education. There's three things in a short period of time I want to convince you of. If I haven't convinced you of each one of them, get back to me in the question and answer period. The first is we have a crisis, and I don't use the word loosely, in public education in America today. The second is it's a crisis that's entirely fixable. And the third is that we seem, for reasons that I want to talk to you about, not to fix it. In other words, this is doable, but damn it, we don't do it. So let's start with the easiest part. We have a crisis. 55 years ago, in Brown versus Board, right after, that's a quarter of our history, we're 220 years old. 55 years ago in Brown versus Board, after we tolerated for 165 years separate but equal, which we all knew was separate, we never thought was equal. We said, okay, we'll give each kid an equal educational opportunity. We're now one quarter further in our history, and make no mistake about it, the color of skin, the zip code you live in, your family's income, are pretty much outcome determinative of the quality of education you're going to get in America today. 55 years after we said we blew it for 165. 25 years ago, we had a nation at risk. We announced in a nation at risk now, 27 years ago. We said that if a foreign power had imposed our public education system on us, we would have considered it an act of war. And here we are 25 years later, and the progress has really been really incremental, despite the fact that we made a lot of change, lots and lots of change, but not real reform. And so, I mean, a lot of reform, not real change. So if you look today, look at any kind of metric, right? African American, Latino kids are so far behind white and Asian kids in America today. If you look at America versus the rest of the world, we are losing ground by the day. Things 30 OECD industrialized countries, forget China and India, 30 OECD countries, and we're 24th in math and 21st in science. Look at a book that was written by two Harvard economists. If you haven't read, I know you don't have a lot of time to read, but if you haven't read this book, get it. It's two Harvard economists. It's called The Race Between Education and Technology. And it lays this out beautifully, right? Claudia Golden and Lawrence Katz. But what it lays out is technology changes the skill demand of the people in the workforce. If you keep them moving in tandem, you're going to succeed. And that's what America did for the first 3 quarters of the 20th century, right? When in the first half of the 20th century, we did something no country ever did. We made secondary school, high school, ubiquitously available. We increased the number of high school graduates dramatically. After the Second World War, we did similar kinds of things in college. We started sending kids routinely to college. And what they show in this book is this ran in parallel. And so more and more people partook of the American dream. More and more people became wealthy. More and more people were able to transform their life through what? The magic ingredient of education. They didn't have primogeniture. They didn't have a family bank account. Education was the level. Starting in the fourth quarter of the 20th century and today, that has completely changed. In fact, in the numbers they use, we're 50% of where we need to be. Technology is running at 4.0, education at 2.0, and that is a prescription for failure. That, and if you look at it in terms of African American, Latino kids, you don't even want to know the numbers. That is a prescription for failure. It's not going to impact all of you. By definition, you got great educations. Your kids will even get good educations. But it's going to impact our nation dramatically. This is the first time we've ever looked out there and we think about the possibility that our kids' generation may be less well educated or only as well educated as our generation. And as technology moves, if you keep this flat, you don't want to know. So it's clear. All right. Second thing, it doesn't have to be. Anybody who has any doubts about this, I will show you those very same kids, poor kids from the worst part of the Bronx or Central Brooklyn, in the most dysfunctional families. I will show you them in schools today in New York City, in which they're getting entirely, and I mean entirely, different outcomes. There's a school we have, one of our charter schools, which is performing, it's 86% high poverty, it's 100% African American Latino. It's performing like a gifted and talented school. And I could go through this example after example. If you look at the recent national tests, right, and you look at poor African-American kids in a place like Detroit, and you compare them to poor African-American kids in New York City, they are like 3 or 4 years behind in the 4th grade. So think about it. My African-American kids, poor African-American kids, are at least a couple of years behind the national average. And these kids in Detroit or in D.C. or in Los Angeles are anywhere from a year and a half to 2 to 2.5 years behind my kids. What are the chances that they can have successful outcomes? But more importantly, that's about education, right? Poor black kids in New York City don't grow up with advantages that poor black kids in Detroit or D.C. or L.A. grow up with. So the fundamental difference, and it's a big difference, not a little difference, is the power of education. Now that's not an argument for stopping where we are in New York, but it is a powerful argument, indeed an irrefutable argument for transforming education because it'll matter. From the day I took this job, lots of friends of mine, good people, said, Chancellor, you're never going to fix education in America until you fix poverty. Those people are exactly 180 degrees backward. We will never fix poverty in America until we fix education. That has been our story. The magic ingredient in our sauce is called the American dream. And the thing that makes it happen is kids like myself who grew up in public housing are able, with nobody in the family go to college, nobody who read to me. And yes, I got asked this last time, so I'll get it on the table. Somebody said, well, did you grow up in a dysfunctional family? It's pretty apparent, but the answer is yes. Physics teacher, high school teachers, teachers in Queens in the story, enabling me to stand on their shoulders to see a world I couldn't see from the first floor of the public housing projects I lived in. So to me, this is not just intellectual, it's deep in my DNA. So okay, we got this crisis, it's fixable, and the question is, why don't we fix it? We keep having the same discussion, right? Over the last 30, 40, 50 years, you know, we've been talking about everybody's an education president, education governor, education mayor. We're all going to fix education, everybody's for it, right? In the meantime, the damn thing is basically flatlined. Some small gains in recent years. And so the question is, why? Right? And what's the discussion? It's the same discussion. We need a lower class size, get a better curriculum, extended day, extended year, do this, do that. We've done all those things. There are school districts that have 20-to-1 class size in my state that are failing miserably. We've more than doubled, in the last 30 years, more than doubled in real dollars our investment in public education. And yet, the outcomes, by and large, haven't changed. And so the question I ask you is, why is that? And that's the question for transformational leadership. You know, if you think about it, and it's an important distinction to just put in your mind. New Orleans, for the tragedy of what happened to New Orleans in the hurricanes, they had a creation challenge. Very different. They built their school system from scratch because of Katrina. But most school districts are not going to be built from scratch. So you want to know the most important lesson I've learned in 7.5 years as Chancellor? In a prior life, I used to be General Counsel of the American Psychiatric Association. There was a whole raft of light bulb jokes that used to go around. Like the older people know. Like, so, you know, if you ask how many teachers you need to change a light bulb, the answer is, I don't know, ask the union. But if you want to know my favorite light bulb joke, it's awfully tough getting up here and putting your heart into it. What the hell is that? Bear with me, because my favorite light bulb joke is really the story of what I want to talk about, which is, how many psychiatrists does it take to change the light bulb? The answer is only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change. What I've learned in the last 7.5 years is the school system does not want to change. See, I came on the scene. I thought I'm a charming guy. I'm going to just get up there and I'm going to say what I said to you. We got a crisis. Everything's broken. It's entirely fixable. Let's all fix it. And everybody looked at me and said, who is this guy? What planet did he come from? And for the last 7 or 7.5 years, this has been a constant battle, challenge, fight. And you have to understand, it's a $22 billion system. It serves the needs of a lot of people. There are enormous hydraulic forces that undergird this thing. And if we don't address those things, it won't be transformative. If you look at a system, and this is a systems challenge, and why I say to people, you know, people say, well, you use business techniques. It's not about business techniques, it's about service delivery. And if you don't transform incentives, reward excellence, pay people based on performance, you're going to continue to get what we have right now. Which is basically, think about it this. The thing we pay for is length of service. We pay more and more for it, good, bad, or indifferent. Think about this. The best financial day in an educator's life is the day she retires. The best financial day is the day she retires, because she's then going to get a pension, and her opportunity to consult and do a million other things is there. If you reward the wrong things, you won't get the right outcomes. I have to pay math teachers and gym teachers. Not a knock on gym teachers, I love them. Math teachers and gym teachers, the same thing. Unfortunately for me, the supply-demand curve intersects in the wrong place. So I get all the gym teachers I need, I don't get the math teachers. When I don't get the math teachers, you know who doesn't get them? Not the people on the east side of Central Park, the people on the north side of Central Park in Harlem. And if those kids don't get math teachers, they're not going to learn math. Just that simple. So when you have systems that are irrational, don't reward the right things, you get dysfunctionality in the system. But you got 135,000 adults who are tied in to that dysfunctionality, and they're not just going to change the way they do business. So the one thing every school reformer from every persuasion wants is they want more money. We're all for that. The one thing they don't really want is more change, meaningful change, differentiated change. I'm in the process of closing schools in New York. Closing schools is disruptive. It's disruptive to adults, it's disruptive to be there, but the Obama administration is absolutely right. If we don't close failing schools and continue to think that we can put in a new curriculum or something like that, we're consigning generation after generation of kids to consistent, repeated failure. But I will tell you, it is like a routine now to close the school. You read the papers in the next week, 10 days, it's going to be all hell breaks out in New York. So the question then is transformational leadership, and why it's so important that we engage each other, and why it's important to this country. Because the question you need to ask yourself, is this the business you want to go into? You know, Theodore Roosevelt made this wonderful book about the great fires in Montana and Roosevelt. I'm a big Roosevelt fan. But Theodore Roosevelt had it about it right. And he said it's not the critic who counts, it's a man or woman in the arena. And the question that I'm posing to you is, do you want to be that person in the arena to take on these challenges? And the three things that I've learned in that regard that I want to share with you. Number one is, it's not about you. Transformational leadership is not about you. It's about something very different. It's about envisioning a future that is informed by but not constrained by the past. Envisioning a future that is informed by but not constrained by the past. If you only think of change in terms of your experience in the past, and you don't have a vision like John Kennedy did to put somebody in the moon, nobody will get to the moon. Everybody at NASA told him it wouldn't happen. Everybody told him he wasn't putting a man on the moon. And he died, and we put a man on the moon. So it wasn't about him. It's about transformational leadership. Second thing to understand about this kind of thing, if you want to be really liked, if that's your thing, run for office. Don't be a transformational leader. Because people like people who are in the business of giving them things and favors and tax breaks and credits and all the other things. But people who try to disrupt a status quo, by definition, are not going to be people that everybody says, God bless this person. I get calls all the time about my friend Michelle Reed, because I was one who suggested her to the mayor. People really love her. But even my good friend said, you got to tell Michelle she's got to calm down a little bit. You know, she needs bedside manner. I know Michelle Reed really well. She's the most engaging person you could possibly imagine. Her bedside manner is phenomenal. The real problem she has is she's willing to assault a status quo that this serves mostly African American kids in the District of Columbia, and that's what she wants to do with her life. And if you think you can sort of saddle soap on that and make everybody love you for it, you're nuts. If you need constant adulation and adoration and don't want a bad newspaper story written about you, go into another line of work. It isn't going to happen. But I really want you to think about that. And then the third thing is, okay, so now you've decided it's not about me, and I don't particularly care if I'm liked or not. You know, it's more important for me to participate in something else. I'm secure, I got the right partner, whatever it is. Now, how do you do it? That's the question. How do you do it? And I'll tell you the third key idea, and then spell it out a little bit for you. Third key idea, the hardest thing about being a transformation leader is when do you put your foot on the gas, and when do you put it on the brake? Because you operate in the real world, and you're disrupting a powerful, well-financed status quo. And that to me is the hardest challenge. You keep your foot on the gas, it's fun. And riding at 1,000,000 miles an hour is really, it's just great, but you drive right off the cliff. You keep your foot on the brake, nothing happens. You know, it's really safe. Nobody ever drove off a cliff with their foot on the brake. But you go no place. And so the strategy we had under the mayor from day one was a few core things. We had a coherent vision. I still think it's the only city in the country that has this vision. We don't talk about a great school system. We don't talk about that because nobody ever sent their kid to a system. We talk about a system comprised of great schools. Now, that's a big difference because politicians, right, unions, they like systems because they're systems players. Indeed, they're very powerful players in a system. Everything we were about when they got there is schools because our view was parents send their kids to schools, that's where education takes place. I set out an org chart from the beginning with the school at the top of the organizational chart. And I today, to this day, I ask my principals every year, several times, how various parts of the bureaucracy are serving them. And I use that as a way to manage the people outside the school. Because if they're not serving the people in the schools, it's a pretty good indication of a child I can eliminate, right? In every other school system, the power runs to the bureaucracy. In our school system, we try to disintermediate that power relationship and replace it with power that runs to the school. And that is enormous political implications. Then we had core levers that we relied on. And it's been in 3 clear phases. Now, my critics say that we changed the phases because the first one didn't work and the second one didn't work, and so we keep selling until we get by. But in fact, we changed the phases both because we knew we had to do so, and second of all, because we created enough capacity in the system to move it to the next step. You just can't show up and say, okay, it's a great school system, now we're going to go to empower our school leaders, hold them accountable, and that's the end of the game. So we started, actually, with a very top-down, almost Soviet-style set of changes, right? We had 3 goals: depoliticize the system, bring coherence, everybody doing the same thing, because if the system isn't coherent, you're not going to be able to ultimately differentiate. And the third thing was to build human capital capacity. And so we had a 32 school district system. I rolled those 32 school districts into 10 regions. I even put different parts of different boroughs in the same region, and all hell broke loose. Because the politicians said, well, where's the district? And I said, the district, what the hell does that mean to me? I got kids in schools, I can tell you where the school is. But they didn't like that at all, and they really didn't like it. And they especially didn't like it when 3 years later, after they finally figured out where the regions were, I eliminated them. In addition to this depoliticization, we went to a common core curriculum, not something I think is a great idea necessarily. Everybody had a math coach and a literacy coach. We did periodic assessments, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, we built a system of sameness. We got everybody talking the same thing, on the same page, invested heavily in professional development. In the first 3 or 4 years, we got decent results, improvements, and so forth. Then the mayor got reelected, and he ran on an entirely different, and here our vision was beginning to mature. Michael Barber, who did this work with Tony Blair, was the best systems thinker I've encountered in the space, said, command and control, you can move a system from awful to barely adequate, and that's what I thought we had done. But to move it from adequate to something like good, you're going to have to do very different things, and so we unleashed the system the second term. Mayor announced in his inaugural 3 pillars of our reform. We're going to be leadership, which is a big statement, because this is a wholly anti-elitist group, but leadership implies a certain dimension of elitism, and this really stirred the pot. Empowerment, we empower our school leaders, and we hold them accountable. We have a very sophisticated, if imperfect, accountability system that has real consequences. So think about this. When I got this job, everybody said, well, if you have what the class size should be, or what the after-school program should be, and all these other, and they wanted me, sitting in Central, to make these dictates for 1,600 schools. Now, how would I figure this out for 1,600 schools? If I was so good at it, I'd go run my own school, right? So why would I figure it out for 1,600? But that's what they did. So there are competing demands in every organization. Leaders should decide how to deploy their resources. How do I know whether you should have a class size of 28 or spend your money to have a class size of 30, but 4 or 5 really great senior master teacher types who can coach your other people. Whether you need an after-school program or an extended day, and since we haven't reached the perfect system, why shouldn't we allow people to differentiate? If I'm a leader, I want to be held accountable, but I also want the power to do the work. When I got there, superintendents not only picked the principal, they picked the assistant principal. So I said, look, this is like nuts. Even before I did all this in I said, this is nuts. So I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to let the principals pick the assistant principals. 32 superintendents. So a person said, oh, Chancellor, you can't do that. So you don't understand the system. I said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you can't do that. I said, why can't I do it? I said, well, these principals don't know how to pick an assistant principal. I said, well, if you got principals who can't pick an assistant principal, we're going to shut the whole thing down. We're laughing. But you see, everybody was laughing at me. They walked out of the room. Boy, this guy really is, he's so naive, he's a rookie, he's a rube, whatever. But if a principal doesn't know how to assemble her team, it ain't gonna happen. And there's nothing I can do from the bureaucracy or any place else. So in fact, now there's a book coming out by a big UCLA management guy, Bellucci, who talks about the fact that our school system principals have more discretion and authority than any place else. And they have greater accountability. Each one signs with me an agreement, and we give them letter grades A to F, and each one signs with me an agreement saying that we can fire them if they get D's and F's, or we can shut down their schools. And they also get big bonuses based on school performance. It's become, at least for our principals, a much more sophisticated and well-managed system. But those three qualities change the system. When people talk about sustainability, one of the things we use very hard is our accountability throws off tons of information for our parents. They may disagree with some of the information, but they want the information. And our principals are now used to making the tough decisions and are increasingly comfortable with accountability. Now the mayor's been reelected, 3 new themes that I hope will complete the transformation in the New York City public school system. And those 3 things are talent management, portfolio management, and innovation. And innovation will impact the first 2. Talent management is about what I've been talking about in a million different ways. We have got to begin to reward excellence in public education. One of the great challenges we have in the 1960s when I went to school, because there were no women in rooms like this in the 1960s, they all went into teaching, was one of the greatest human capital subsidies any organization, any system has ever seen. We've lost that human capital subsidy. Throughout the world, whether it's in Korea or Singapore, I had the privilege to spend time with Lee Klein, who created this in Singapore and explained it to me brilliantly. Whether it's Finland, Korea, Singapore, people who draw their teachers from the top 30 of their college graduates, they ace the education system. America draws its teachers predominantly from the bottom third of its college graduates, and that has all sorts of repercussions. We have got to create an excellence-driven system in which people want to be excellent, and in which people are to be excellent, and in which people who take on the toughest challenges and the highest needs neighborhoods are not only rewarded, but truly see as great heroes in the system. And that's about talent management. It's going to be a lot of labor management things. The mayor made a speech 10 days ago focusing on all those issues. We're going to face people being fired in New York City, teachers. And if I have to lay them off by seniority, it's going to be catastrophic. I've spent the last 7 years recruiting some of the best people to come to our city to teach. Layoffs, if they're for the benefit of kids, as awful as they are, should be based on merit, not based on seniority and everything else in the system. So we're going to drive talent management. Portfolio management is one of the most radical ideas. It sort of builds off of leadership and talent accountability. We think the schools are not something we can run from Central. We have partnered with the Asia Society, Outward Bound, every group in the world, every charter maintenance organization. I went out and I said, I'm going to make New York City the Silicon Valley for great charter organizations. Why did I do that? Look, you want a public school, you want a charter school, as long as you serve my kids, particularly kids in underserved communities, then you bring your talent, you bring your vision. So Shimon's got a whole new idea of how to create a school. And we have 4 teachers responsible for 60 kids, master teacher, partner teacher, associate teacher, apprentice teacher. We're going to open that school in the fall in New York City. I've got a thing called the School of One, in which kids don't go to classes, they go to stations. And the kid moves at her pace or his pace, lots of online stuff. First time ever, Time Magazine has its 50 inventions of the year. School of One, which we piloted last summer, was one of the top 50 inventions of the year. I've got a school that's built all on game theory and games called Quest to Learn. I've got all sorts of things like that. That's what portfolio management is about. In other words, I don't operate. What I do is I shut those that need to be shut, and I double down on those that are doing the work. And I work with the TIPS and the Achievement First and the Uncommons, and I say to them, let's devise a 5-year growth strategy that challenges their capacity. And I go all over. I come up here to Boston, and I find great charter operators, and I say, come to New York, I'll give you space. And I go to community groups, and I say, you can develop capacity. You forget the Asia Society running schools, a big damn thing. So I want to manage portfolio. I don't want to run 1,600 schools. And then innovation, innovation, innovation. We're the only, it's a sad joke. But in any other field, if you fell asleep 100 years ago and you woke up there, you wouldn't recognize it. Practice of medicine, entirely different, right? Practice it throughout the world. If you fell asleep 100 years ago and you woke up today and you're a teacher, same damn thing, right? You know, one teacher for 25 kids, you argue whether it's 22 or 25. One teacher, 25 kids, and the same service delivery. The teacher's got a hard job, right? Because you got kids of all different talent, and you got to try to figure out how to teach those 25 kids. So you teach to the center, and we don't use technology. My favorite example of this, and this just shows you the world I live in. So I've opened up a lot of new small schools that are working. But one of the unfortunate parts of that is I get only sometimes 2 or 3 kids who can take or want to take AP Physics. And so I can't give them a class, right? So on the other hand, there are great online courses in AP Physics, and these are highly motivated kids. So I went to my state and they said they have a requirement, it's called seat time. And what seat time means is basically if you don't have a teacher, this is called feather bedding, if you don't have a teacher in the classroom, then we can't give you credit for the course. So I said, here's what you do, you give me an exception. And they said, what do you mean? I said, these kids will go online and take the course. If they pass it, if they fail it, they don't get high school credit. If they pass it, they get college credit. They ought to be able to get high school credit. They said, no, it doesn't work that way. I said, tell me what that means, it doesn't work. I said, no. I said, I know you have a requirement. That's why I'm here asking for a waiver. Now, I've got thousands of kids that could be taking these courses. They would do it on their own time. They do it at home. They get a 4 or 5 on a damn thing. Colleges throughout the country can give them credit, but they can't get high school credit. So we're not remotely thinking intelligently about this whole service delivery. I've been meeting with some entrepreneurs in Israel who've developed a software program. I've been meeting with a young African-American entrepreneur who's developed games that teach kids quadratic or, you know, these sort of Sony game station thing. And there's so much more of this stuff we can do. So the completion of the transformation would be to leave the school district with 3 core functions. 1, talent management, 2, portfolio management, and number 3, innovation, 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 disruptive innovation. Clay Christensen is absolutely right about this, but disruptive innovations are not going to be limited to a one-time thing. So that's where we are right now. Stay tuned as to how far we go. It's going to be tough economic times. But the real reason to be here today is to ask each of you to look inward, to think about how you become a transformation leader and how you make this nation the nation we want it to be. It bothers me enormously. I love this nation deeply. There's something very wrong about the fact that in the 220-year history, for 165 years, we tolerated separate from equal. We said we were going to change it. And right now in America today, 55 years later, the zip code you live in is pretty much going to be outcome determinant of the education you get. That isn't going to change because the current system is not going to just go away because somebody charming with a bedside manner and a big smile and a good communication team showed up. That's going to change if real leaders, people like the people in this room, are willing to put their shoulders, their hearts, their minds, and their talents against transformation. And that's, you're here, you wouldn't be thinking about them, you wouldn't be here if you weren't thinking about these things. Think hard about it. The country teaches you that. Thank you.
All right, let's get to the, I have one I really want to ask Joel, but let's get a couple from you first, and then I'll pop back in. Yeah.
Hi, Nick Stewart. I'm actually at the Ed School in the Technology, Innovation, and Education strand. I want to sort of ask you about your whole, we're talking about irrational systems. If you reward the wrong thing, you get the wrong outcome. To me, the most irrational system that we have in education is the assessment system, how we assess student progress. That is a standardized assessment system that's focused almost entirely on math, facts, and reading facts, and it's pretty much one size fits all. So since we have that system and that's all we have, then we assess schools based on their ability to get kids to conform to that standardized assessment. And then we reward schools that do that. So what that's done is narrowed the curriculum essentially to math, to teaching to the math test and teaching to the reading test, which is essentially gutted the public education system in this country. So I'm wondering sort of what your take on that is, not just in the, in 5 words or less, what your take is on that sort of nationally, and what your take is on that with regard specifically to New York. And is New York trying some innovative different ways, or could you just describe what innovative ways New York is using to assess the public schools beyond that sort of really simple?
Well, so we have a 3-part, I want to come back to testing, but we have a 3-part evaluation system. Every year we survey teachers, parents, and students about the schools. We publish it. That's part of the overall evaluation. It provides an enormous amount of data. We do something for each school called a quality review, independent assessment about how they're set up to operate and so forth. And third thing we do take into account is test scores. So let me push back a little. First of all, I agree. When you say what gutted public education was the tests, I basically fundamentally disagree with you. From everything in American history through now, basically kids who grew up in high poverty schools were not performing remotely well. And indeed, one of the good things about No Child was it shined a spotlight on the fact that our African American Latino kids are so massively behind. Now, I think you need to assess, and I would also say, and I've been through a lot of this week, we need more robust, more multidimensional assessments. But education is about, in my view, several things. One is knowledge acquisition, and it matters. It's not just enough to be a great thinker. You need to know history, you need to know math. People who don't know algebra typically don't tend to be great higher order thinkers. Knowledge acquisition is a part of it, and it can be tested. Skills acquisition can also be tested, and there are ways to look at whether kids are thinking. You can do group projects and other things which I think can be built into this. And so to me, the failure to assess is an abdication of our responsibility. Now you say teaching to the test. So what I have done is I can correlate my 8th grade scores on what are admittedly at best weak tests in New York City. I can correlate my 8th grade scores with high school graduation rates and likelihood of college success. Now, they're very imperfect, and we need to do a lot more. But in the end, if we fail to assess, what will happen is what happened when I arrived, which was I went to these high schools, places I knew from where I grew up and played basketball. I went to these high schools. I met kids in the 10th grade, in 9th grade, who could not read, and it took my breath away. And I can test whether a kid can both decode the word on the page and read. Kids who don't read, I don't know what other skills, but those kids are in trouble.
Yes. Hey, Justin.
Hi, Chancellor Klein. I'm Justin Bauer. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School, and I worked at KIPP for several years before coming here. And I wanted to ask you about innovation that you mentioned at the end, and I'm wondering what you do at the district level to identify practices of innovation, especially in charter schools or classrooms of district schools across the district, to help to scale them up and share, and how that would change from to a superintendent like you that's very progressive versus where there's more of a barrier between the charters and district schools.
Well, first of all, that's politics, the barrier between, right? My view is anybody who wants to come and bring good things to help transform education, particularly in the areas where it's not working, in high poverty communities, I want them to come. And if KIPP wants one governance structure and somebody else wants another, I just don't want any barriers to entry. What portfolio management is about is exactly that. So I look at how KIPP performs uncommon. I've got a group that does it in the public schools called Urban Assembly. They got 20 schools. They prefer the public school model. That's up to them. But I look at their results, I look at how many kids want to go to their schools, I look at how long their waiting lists are, and then I sit down, whether it's David Levin or anyone else, and I say to those people, basically, let's make a plan for expansion. And at the same time, when you say I'm not running the schools, when I don't decide class size or curriculum or program, I say to somebody like Katie Salen, who's doing exactly what the last gentleman was talking about, one of the most dynamic applied learning models I have ever seen, grew up out of game theory, and she comes in and she's held accountable. And she's going to be measured for her successes, but there's no question that people will come to you if you get in the role of portfolio management, but they're not going to come to you if you're in the role of operator. So what did I create? I took out of the bureaucracy somewhere around $250 million a few years ago. Got rid of a lot of people, and I created something called a school support organization. We did 11 of them. 5 we created internally working with McKinsey, and 6 were both university and community-based organization partnerships. And they all put together their own model and program and their price point for how they would support a school. And I said to all of these schools, all 1,600, you pick the one you want. I just took $250 million, I gave you the money, now you figure out what you want. This, again, put the school in the posture to be able to control its destiny and to differentiate. Each of those groups, network schools, and innovation flows through the network. And each of them, when I see results, I go study what happened that made the results. And then we figure out how to replicate it, double down on it. So whether it's charters or publics, I'm agnostic. Whether it's good or bad, I am very concerned with.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah Dillard. I'm a joint degree student here at Harvard Business School. And you were talking about the difference between, popularity and being liked and running for office versus transformational leadership, and you mentioned the example of Michelle Rhee. I know that something that her administration is actually very concerned with is popularity for 2 reasons. One is because she's mayorally appointed, and her popularity is linked to the mayor's, and the mayor is not pulling ahead currently in the next election cycle. And then the other is because her ability to affect change, particularly transformational change, is linked to her ability to make, to get policies pushed through that require popular support. So how do you kind of square that, need for popular support, and how should she mobilize it better?
Well, I think this is an important question, but first I want to make the point that I think is important. You will not transform systems without breaking China.
Sure.
And if you break China, people will be upset, right? Major Owens, Congressman of New York, he's not a big fan of mine, but he did say at a community meeting, he said, he's often asked, why are people getting in Joel Klein's way? And he said, if Klein was going no place, nobody would get in his way. So I understand that. Now, you have to do the communications work. You have to show results, and Michelle is showing real results in D.C. I mean, there's nobody in that city who doesn't think that she's getting better outcomes than when she started. You have to have a mayor who will support you. We've been through now 2 elections, and each one of them was controversial. I mean, the guy who ran against the mayor in the last election, that guy who ran against him ran on the platform to fire me. And a guy, and look, I'm sure he got some votes for that. But you've got to do the community. One of the things that I think we in this side of the equation don't do well is the community organized. Part of the problem, if I can be just blunt about this, and why I started Education Equality Project. I mean, I started originally in what was a real odd couple was with me and Sharpton. And what was really shocking is of the 2 of us, Sharpton's now working for Obama and I'm doing EEP. So you can't predict how this is going to turn out. But I felt like a whole bunch of white guys talking about ed reform weren't connecting, so it was like an echo chamber, and I felt like we weren't involved in the communities. Now, when you see what's going on in Harlem right now, it's so powerful because we've created a real choice system, and the parents in Harlem now would not let us go back to the system we had before because they're so well organized and they understand the difference between whether it's Jeff Canada's school or Eva Moskowitz's school or KIPP or whatever. So one of the reasons I did this national thing is to help build political support. We got to reach out to faith-based groups. We've got to reach out to community groups. That's very hard work, and we have got to do it and have done a terrible job, those of us on this side of the position. Having said that, in the last election, the Times polled, those people who voted only on education voted 57-40 for Bloomberg. That's a good number. There's a lot of people who don't like what we're doing. And that's the point I'm making about transformational leadership. Whereas, the old story, if you say yes to everybody, it may eventually catch up with you. But in the meantime, everybody likes what you say.
So Joel, I'm going to ask you my question here because it's a tangent from this one about that led you to talk about EEP and working with Reverend Sharpton. And David opened with this anecdote about how you, when you were at the Justice Department, sued Microsoft, and yet you and Bill Gates have become good partners, and he's a big funder of your work there. So I know why you do that. I mean, it's clear to everybody, why would you partner with someone like Reverend Sharpton, who has an organization that has sued you a number of times before you partnered with him, right? And why you'd partner with Bill Gates and why he would partner with you. So I'm not so interested in hearing you think out loud about the why. But just as a transformational leader, as an individual, when so much of what we see kind of in the public sphere is people taking these polar sides and then fighting about them, what does it take to actually build these coalitions among people who fundamentally disagree with each other or have had really serious fights with each other in the past, to have real partnerships to get things done where those things are pushed aside and you can get some real work done?
So
You've done that brilliantly.
it's a great question. Let me start with an anecdote, because I love this thing about Gates. Indeed, I'll give you one piece of advice. Suing Bill Gates is pretty much a career-ending move. So if you don't want to be a chancellor, don't do it. So it's a true story. Gates had invested $10 million along with Carnegie and Soros, and right before I got there, to open up new small schools. And everybody was panicked because they thought, now Klein's here and Gates will no longer invest. And we worked hard on it. I hired Caroline Kennedy. She worked hard on, and finally Gates agreed about 9 months into it to come to New York, and he was going to give us $51 million for new small schools. And it was really very much, I hadn't seen him. He really did not like me, didn't like David Boies. It was not, but he decided to do it. And we went to Morris High School in the Bronx, where we had a couple of small schools. He didn't notice. It was a school my father had dropped out of during the Great Depression. So it was a very emotional day for me. And Gates couldn't have been better. I mean, I thought he was going to say, you can have the money, but the human contact ain't going to be there and all this. But he was terrific. We worked with kids. We had the press conference. I got off. I walked down, and a principal, I was just feeling this enormous relief. I could breathe again. And a principal tugs on my jacket and said, Chancellor, $51 million. What a great day's work. Think of what Gates would have given you if you hadn't sued him. So, I always think about that. Because, but part of the creative role in leadership is to look for different coalitions. If you have the same old coalitions, you'll have the same old outcomes. So I have a friend named James M. Toomey. James M. Toomey is an amazing guy. He played jazz percussion for Miles Davis, decided, he wrote The Closer I Get to You for Stephanie Mills, or for Roberta Flack, and he wrote for Stephanie Mills, and he's a phenomenal talent. He decided he needed to have voice and in addition to music, opens up a thing called Open Line on the radio. It's basically a million African-American people in the tri-state area, et cetera, listen to this thing. So if you're in public education, you go on there. So I go on there, I meet the guy, and he does this weird thing. He takes me to Milwaukee. He says, if you really care, I want you to come to Milwaukee, meet Howard Fuller, a guy who created BAO, which is basically an organization for options for African-American kids. So I meet with him, et cetera, and Toomey and I get to know each other, and Toomey is very close to Sharpton. He says to me, you and Sharpton got to work together. So you disagree on a lot of things, but you got to work together. So I said, okay, put it together. Because what I said before, I meant a whole bunch of white guys standing on a street corner preaching this kind of stuff isn't going to work. I know that. Sharpton has enormous voice in the African-American community and gives me enormous credibility. He brings stuff to the field that I don't have. I bring stuff he doesn't have. He and Newt Gingrich, of all people, are now going around doing a road show. And they disagree on healthcare and they disagree on everything else. And you've got to do creative, different things. And I can tell you, lots of people who were less worried about me got a lot more worried about me when I started setting up EEP. I got Cory Booker in EEP right now. I just got, what's his name, John Conyers from Detroit in EEP. People who don't usually show up for this kind of thing. It's really bipartisan. I mean, I've got Jeb Bush in the thing. I got John McCain in the thing. And as I said, I got John Conyers, I got Cory, I got Kevin Johnson, who's the mayor of Sacramento. I've got Michael Nutter. I've got Antonio Villaraigosa. La Raza is in the thing. So that's what you got it. And I'll tell you the truth, this is the hardest part of the work. This is the work that I am not excited about. I just know it's necessary. Why I'm not so excited about it, because this is work that takes meetings. And, meetings take up a lot of time. But you've got to build those coalitions. And one of the things we're going to do a lot of is, I think, on the national stage, there's going to be enormous pushback. What Obama and Duncan are doing is exactly right on Race to the Top. They have a winning formula. And if they can give 3 or 4 states in the first round that do really big big changes and use the dollars to incentivize a lot of China breaking in the States. Then they can create a model that they can replicate in the second round and indeed move into the education, the ESEA reauthorization, Elementary Secondary Education Act reauthorization. So they're on to a big idea. Use competition and real tight budget times to try to change it. And what they need is they're going to get enormous pushback. And they need voice on the other side of the issue. But think about this, when you talk about coalitions, you read the New York Times op-ed page, you very rarely will see across the entire spectrum of their politics on the op-ed page support for what Obama's doing in education. They won't all agree on healthcare, they certainly don't agree on Afghanistan, but everybody from David Brooks on through Bob Herbert, on through Nick Kristof, all of them, and the Times editorial page, all of them are editorializing for Obama on these issues, which is really a big deal because you create this new coalition. If Michelle Reed didn't have the kind of undying support of the Washington Post, she'd be in much worse shape than she is right now.
I'm going to make an editorial comment about this because Joel won't say it about himself. This is one of the things I've learned most from Joel, watching him manage these, I call them coalitions of unusual suspects instead of usual suspects, is that it is one thing to put them together, and that's hard enough, and it takes a lot of meetings. It's another thing when things get rough to when you're one of the brightest people of your generation and have these enormous accomplishments of your own, to put your ego in check and to manage yourself personally. This is kind of the internal I thing I think you talk about, Joel, to manage yourself personally in a way that allows those coalitions to hang together and get things done. Because if his ego got out of control, and it could, and he's accomplished a lot, then these things oftentimes would have no chance of hanging together. And I've watched him do that over and over and over in some pretty difficult situations and moments. And so I just wanted these young people to hear
Thank
you and to hear me say that about you. Because you've got to think, I mean, you have to think at the moment of leadership, am I going to kind of take care of my own identity here? Or am I going to behave in a way that allows the coalition to hang together and get something done? And I've watched him do it a number of times.
Well, thank you. If you've just brought back about 30 horrible memories, but I appreciate you saying that. But if you're looking for slights in life, you'll find them. Remember what I said about transformational leadership. It's not about you. Look, all of us have egos, all of us, but the one thing that I really believe deeply is I got my education. I was really lucky. I didn't have to end up going from public housing to the most public house in America, the Clinton White House. So it ain't about me. There are a lot of kids in my city right now who I know are dead-ended. And if I stay focused on that, one or two things, and this is really the hardest message in all this, is when I took this job, and even today, I know the risk of failure is not trivial. None of us like to fail. But if you're not prepared to fail, then don't do transformational leadership, because in the end, there's a reason why there's no urban school system in America that people point to and say, that's the one to replicate yet. And so the odds, as Jack Welch told me when I took this job, he said, it took me 10 years to turn around GE, and I had every weapon in my arsenal. He said, you're going to go do this job with a likelihood of doing it for 7 years. They didn't know the mayor would run again. And he said, and you got no weaponry. How the hell do you think you're going to do it? And he's pushed me on that question time and time and time again.
Right. Yes.
Going with that, when we talk about this transformational leadership, we're often looking sort of on the back end where there's already a track record of success. I'm interested to hear you talk about, though, sort of how you started out and when you were, beginning in the public school system. What were sort of your 100-day goals? Where do you begin down this path?
This is a great question. So first of all, just a word antecedent about preconditions. I wouldn't have done this job if Bloomberg hadn't gotten control of the system. That was, to me, critical. Now, a lot of people do work in school board environments, do fine, God bless them, but I wouldn't have worked on it. Second of all, I wouldn't have worked if I didn't think he had my back. And one of the things I love about Mike, somebody in the paper calls for me to be fired. And not a minute goes by, he doesn't either shoot me an email or call me on the phone and say, I'm so angry. I said, what's the matter? He says, well, now if I want to fire you, I can't. So, that's Mike Bloomberg. No, but that's really, it's really important. So the first thing I did, and this was the hardest thing I did, if I had grown up in the field, I would have been fine. When I became Assistant Attorney General, I put together my team. The first thing you put together is a team. You don't have a team, you can't do the work. And so the first thing I did, I had a month to hire my five core people that became my original cabinet. When I did it at the Justice Department, I knew everybody in the space. It was easy. I just, here, I knew nobody. I ended up with 5 people who I had never met before in my life, and I had to do it in a month. And the truth is, I made some mistakes. I made some great choices, but I made some mistakes. Because what I want to do is then build it. And the second thing, and here, some people might disagree with me, but I really felt that I was at the beginning of a school year. I could do nothing that school year that would be dramatic. I did, a few things. I gave superintendents bonuses. I did a few other things. But then I put together, and I got Eli Broad and Julian Robertson to give me $5 million. And I said, I'm going to put together, and we'll announce it in January on Martin Luther King's birthday. We're going to announce this big plan. And that's where what I call depoliticization, if I could pronounce it, I'd call it that, along with coherence and capacity building, and drove like 5 big things that we had worked on. I had principals committees, parents committee. I spent the first 4 months virtually every evening out in the field talking to people, getting their input on what was wrong with the system, this and that, hired lots of different internal and external people to work on it, and then came up with these 5 major things. Then the big part, and this is really important, is managing to successful implementation. Michael Barber, who I mentioned, said the road to school reform is littered with great ideas poorly executed. And that happened to us as well. There's very little management capacity inside the system. And second of all, both flying the plane and redesigning it at the same time is tough work, no matter what you do. I have to operate. That's why I think New Orleans is an interesting thing, because they could start from scratch. But I had to operate a school system at the same time I had to change it. I had to be out there, and this goes to some of what Stacy's talking about and others. I was out there calling for major changes in the way we pay teachers. And yet this is going to impact the very people in the system. So if I say I got to pay math teachers more than gym teachers, I promise you at the next meeting of the gym teachers, I'm burned in effigy, right? And they're pissed off and they don't want to do it and they don't like to work in this. So those things are very challenging. And if you screw up the implementation, you get a real problem. When this whole thing cracked and we got most of it reasonably well implemented, we made a big mistake on the whole issue of suspensions and didn't create capacity to handle it. And I'll never forget this day. Wake up on a Friday morning, New York Times, A1 story, how all these schools had all these increases in violence because there was no way for us, no capacity to deal with suspensions, so the kids had to remain in the schools, et cetera, and all hell broke loose. The mayor, God bless him, he got right out in front of the entire city, went on the TV and said, I told you to hold me accountable when I took control of the city. You should hold me accountable. I screwed this up, and I'm going to fix it. And and everybody at least took a deep breath, because one of the things you never hear in government, I screwed this up and I'm going to fix it. And of course, he said it, and everybody remembers that day. Of course, then he got off this television and he gave me a phone call. It was not fun. It was not fun. One of the things about accountability, when it applies to you, it's always suboptimal.
All right, yes.
Hi, I'm Joel Adrians, and I'm also at the Graduate School of Education. It seems like one of the largest problems in the public education sector is attracting the right people into teaching. But there's so many things that go against that in the way the system currently works. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how, in a broader sense, we could start getting that top third going into teaching and less of that reliance on the bottom third.
You have to do a couple of things. What makes people want to teach is a combination of traditional incentives, money, convenience, etc., coupled with a real sense of success. Now, paradoxically, if you don't get the right people, you're unlikely to get the successes. And so you have a negative feedback loop. What we're trying to do, and what we've done a lot of, is by opening new schools, giving people like Mark Sternberg, who was up here at the Ed School, is now a White House fellow working for Arnie Duncan. And he was 29 years old when he did it. He opened up a school, and he was just full of passion and excitement and attracted people who work 20 hours a day. And they created outsized results at a thing called Bronx Lab. So one of the things, and you couldn't have done that in an existing school. If I gave an existing school, you wouldn't have been able to attract the same kind of thing. Second of all, we've got to rationally compensate. I talked to tons of teaching fellows, Teach for America people. So in the early years, every raise is small and grudging, and you're there 10 years until you get to a livable wage. And then if you stick around for 30 years and you get your lifetime pension and lifetime health benefits, it makes sense. I offered our union a deal in which I said everybody who I hire tomorrow could come in and have the current benefit package, or we do a different one with a defined contribution pension, a more modest health care plan, get an independent actuary to monetize the value that I save from those and put it in the first 5 to 7 years. I'm absolutely convinced if I did that people who say to me they couldn't do it at 50,000, all these people nodding their head behind you, could do it at 65 or 70. Then if you put in merit pay as a differentiator so that people who are getting outsized results, and I take the point of the gentleman in the back, it's got to be real evaluations, not just simple one-dimensional evaluations. But if you do those things, which is what Michelle tried to propose in D.C., if you can get people in the first 5 years to $75,000, $80,000, I think, not everyone, some of them will still go to Goldman Sachs, some of them will still go elsewhere, but more and more people will stay. Then, if you get the real talent, and they start getting successes, you know how good it feels to go up to a high poverty community and have people come like Jeff Canada was on 60 Minutes last week, and Roland Fryer's evals and all that. So, you know how good it feels for people to say, man, I'm part of that. You know, I'm changing the world. So if you take the psychic rewards, couple them with a rational compensation scheme, you get a positive feedback loop. It's going to be hard to do because there's an existing system that's not terribly interested in that transformation.
David, did you have a question you wanted to
Yes,
ask Joe?
Other than your light bulb reference, you've talked almost not at all about the unions. And I'm just curious, can you, we keep hearing about the union posing so many obstacles. What your experience has been, if you could help people understand how you dealt with this.
It's you know, I use this phrase, which is sort of like the light bulb, but it's a different variation of it, is the unions remind me of the song, That's the Glory of Love. You know, you give a little, take a little, let your poor heart break a little. That's the story of, that's the glory of love. It's also the story of and glory of our negotiations. We've had some incredibly successful things. Here's the way I say it. Look, the unions got to protect aspects of the status quo. That's inevitable. Their members insist on it. They wouldn't get reelected if they didn't. You've got to create an environment in which, through a mixture of things, you can move the discussion. The toughest negotiations we had, and they were tough, were really when we stopped doing forced placements of teachers. We required teachers to teach another 37.5 minutes a day, basically eliminated a lot of the grievance and other mechanisms, things that a lot of people wanted. But at that point, we were able to put a lot of money in the pot so that the average teacher was looking at certain things that maybe she thought, you know, I have to work a little longer. Maybe some people were agitated that I no longer get a forced placement if I get excess at a school, et cetera, et cetera. But the financial package was strong enough. And we won, when I say we, the union won that contract by about a 2/3 vote, which is extraordinarily low for them. So they didn't have a big margin. In the end, and this is what's so powerful about what Obama's doing, you've got to create an environment in which it makes it possible for them to move. And you've got to be prepared at times to realize you won't get everything. But it's our job, and what Stacy talks about, to create those coalitions so that they know there are going to be countervailing forces. So right now, most unions are looking at race to the top, and they don't want to be seen, particularly in this economic environment, as the people who didn't enable their state to get race to the top money, and that's generating reform.
So give them enough room to move so that they can do it, appear to be doing it on their own, but keep pressure on them through the countervailing forces.
And have a, this is whatever your view is, Obama is out there on this, right? And, you know, it's very hard for unions, which are overwhelmingly Democrat, teachers unions, to tackle this president on that issue. So that's what leadership is about. And he didn't have to do race to the top. Think about this. I mean, he's thought this through. He's going to give money Arnie Duncan said it publicly, you're going to be far more losers than winners in a race to the top. Now, you've been around a long time. When all of those senators call and say, wait a second, New York didn't get it, Nevada didn't get it, California didn't get it, when Pelosi calls, it's going to be an interesting discussion, right? But they've set this up. They've put an independent point system, and Arnie, every place he goes, says there are going to be many more losers than winners. And that means that these guys are dug in on it. People worry about whether they'll get rolled, but that means they're dug in. And that's what leadership is all about. And I don't think, while teachers' unions may privately complain about this or that, get some movement on this or that, they're not going to tackle this president on this issue, I don't believe. And that's leadership.
Yes.
Justin Steele, joined business school, Kennedy School student. So as you were talking, I'm thinking to myself, like, what are the gaps between where I am and what it takes to be a transformational leader? And there are many. Some of which I feel like I can learn, and some of them I'm not sure if I can learn them. And one of the things that really keeps me up at night and thinking whether I have the strength to do what you do is really this sort of deep-seated confidence question, right? So you look at most transformational leaders, at least externally, they present a very confident sort of view. I mean, you stand up and you're clearly very, very confident, and you can hold some of the chaos with that confidence that you're generating in the system. But what scares me is, how do you walk the line between arrogance and confidence? Because I'm very afraid that, I mean, I know the false ways to adopt that sort of confidence, but I'm afraid that will drive me to arrogance. And I'm very afraid of sort of becoming old and becoming very, very arrogant and sort of enclosed in my own little world. So where does your confidence come from, and how do you walk the line between arrogance and confidence?
It's a wonderful question, and it's what I said at the outset about a leader, unlike the eye, looking within. I do that. I'm married to the person who is my best advisor on anything, and she's not at all hesitant to tell me when I'm a jerk, and not infrequently. I surround myself with people. I mean, this relationship I have with Shimon, where I'm the mentor and he's the mentee, but it is a peer relationship. He never hesitates to tell me things like that. In the end, I think a lot about the issue. I don't get it right all the time, but I'll tell you what keeps me going is I really believe this deeply, and this is where I become, I hope, confident but not arrogant. It's not about me. I got mine. I'll be fine. Look, if I got fired, or if Billy Thompson won on a program that said, throw this bum out, and he got elected mayor, that would bother me. And it would bother me a lot. But I promise you, I would be okay. There's a million things that I want and can do. So what I really want to convey, and what the message I give every meeting, you ask Shimon, ask anyone who meets with me, inside the school system, when I talk to my people, I tell them that this is a system that responds to voice and purchase. And your job is to be the voice for the voiceless and the purchase for the purchaseless. And that's the position that I want to convey to them. Everybody, if I get a call from a congressman or a senator or a council member, do this, do that, and we're all used to that, get this kid into this school. Who's going to get some kid who's got no champion, whose parents maybe work 14 hours, or doesn't have parents? Some of my kids sleep on subways. Who's their voice? And if I keep focused on that, that doesn't mean that I don't get pissed off if I get an article that's bad, or if I don't feel underappreciated sometimes. But if I keep that focus and the people around me respect that in me and reinforce it in me, then I think I can get through it.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up?
Sure.
You said something very interesting, which is, I got mine, right? So it's like, you have some accomplishments that you stand on. And I wonder, how important is it for us to try to find those motivated sweet spots to build the accomplishments, so that when we eventually get to that position, we really can take it off and say, it's not about me. I've got some accomplishments lined up. Or is that not as important?
You're going to get yours. The people in this room got theirs. No, I'm serious. I mean, come on, you're at an elite university in a kind of double program, and all your fellows, people have made big bets on you. You've got yours. What you want to do is train for it. I mean, one of the things David will tell you, when we worked in the White House, right? It was in a time, it was right at, both of us arrived in a couple of months apart, right during the period of Travelgate, through Whitewater, through all, I mean, the wheels were literally falling off the political bus. We used to get there at 6 in the morning, and then we'd leave at 10:30 at night to pick up the Washington Post, so we knew what we were doing the next day. I mean, we were in free fall. If I hadn't have done that, I couldn't do this. I mean, and, you know, you make one mistake. I've been there 2 weeks, and one of these White House insiders who put a hit on me, basically in the Washington Post said, oh, don't worry about Klein, he'll be gone before people ever figured out who he was. And I mean, this stuff really, if I hadn't have been through some of that, I remember a guy inside the White House who called me, because you know I was close to David, called me while he got on a telephone with a media outlet and basically said the last screw up was by David Gergen. Guy wanted to stick a knife in his heart. And his message to me was, don't stay too close to David Gergen. This is the real world. It's tough. Put yourself in an environment where you're constantly challenged. When, you know, what I tell people is the definition of a transformational leader is somebody who gets comfortable living outside her comfort zone. And that's what you want to, that's always growth. The other thing, when anybody says, I'm finished, right? Teachers say to me, I've been doing this for 25 years. And the inference is, look, I've nailed this. You know, I say, well, if that's the way you feel, go do something else where you can learn and you can grow and you can develop, because you're in stasis right now. And that's constantly, so don't worry about getting yours. You'll get all you want. Worry about what you do with it when you got it.
Yes.
I'm Melissa, I'm from the Ed School, and you said transformational leader is being prepared to fail and living outside your comfort zone. I think that's, at least for me and a lot of other people here, that is a really difficult thing to sort of face up to and know how to do. And so I'm wondering, what are your suggestions and how you sort of came about being comfortable with failing and living outside of and facing up to those criticisms?
So some of it is experience. I got asked this question, so I alluded to it before. Somebody asked me, well, you must have been through some very terrible things in your own life, in your personal life, so that, and you survived them. I've been through some enormously tough times. I don't want to bring tears to your eyes, so I won't relate the details. But I've been through, and including the environment I grew up in. One of the things I knew is if I could get out of that environment and survive and go on and do the things that I wanted to do in my life, that I had a certain inner strength that I could call on. Some people do this through faith. I don't want to tell you which pathway. The second thing that I think is really important about this is to keep pushing yourself. I do law school graduation speeches because I'm the paradigm of somebody who can't hold a job. But basically they bring me in to say to people, you know, think about this. You get out of law school, they tell you, then go to a law firm because, you know, you want to learn the tough, rough skills. So you go to a law firm. Then you're there for 5-6 years and people start to recruit you to do other things, but you're on your way to partnership now. So people say, don't leave now because you're on your way to partnership, right? Then you get to be a partner, and then people say you can't leave now and do something differently because you really, this is your rainmaking period. Now you're 55 years old, you're making $1 million a year and you're miserable. And I know 1,000 people, personal friends of mine, who are exactly on it. And I say to them, why didn't you do something else where you felt challenged, motivated, excited? And I contrast that with Lewis Powell, who David mentioned, who had an exactly opposite career. His life was Hunton Williams. He built it, created it, had enormous civic participation, took Richmond through desegregation, all of that. I'm not saying which path is right. What I am saying is the lesson I learned from my father. My father was one of the most talented people in the world and one of the most miserable people in the world. Every day he got up, he went to work at the post office. Got up at 4 in the morning, went to work at the post office, delivered mail for 35 years. Why did he do that? Because he didn't want his kids to have to quit high school because he wanted job security like he had to quit high school during the Great Depression. And he hated his life. He also made the bad mistake of marrying someone that he didn't enjoy living with. If you get 0 for 2 on those two things, it's just hard to figure out where the good news is, right? So I have really, my life is in reaction formation to those two things. I've never worried. What's the worst that's going to happen if, in fact, suppose the mayor didn't run, the next mayor didn't want me, there's other hills to climb, places to go. I just want to be climbing hills. I don't want to be walking in the flatlands on the same grass every day.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a question about advocacy and I guess legitimacy. You had talked about, you said a couple things. I had been there, as well as it's not about you, which is really great to hear because it means that you're standing for a community. But I wanted to ask, like, how important is it that you had shared those experiences and had been in the places and gone through the struggles that you did in order to represent that community whose struggles that you share? Or is empathy enough? Can you say that you're an advocate for something without having undergone through those same genuine experiences of a community that you say you represent? Or is it just enough that you can try?
No, I think humanity is enough. I think the people who advocate for the things that we're talking about here for really significant reform, who've grown up in entirely different environments. Advocacy is different than transformational leadership, and that's a much more complicated question. But many of the people and the things that Stacey talked about, the coalitions we put together, bring in very weird and strangely different people. I mean, the fact that Gates gives me $150 million is, he comes from an entirely different world. He gets advocacy, he gets the power of change. So you want to bring lots of people from different places. It's just what your passion is in life. My passion is education because it changed my life. And my passion is that I think the greatest stain on America's remarkable history is race relations. And if I can do anything to give back in this country, they gave me everything. I mean, this country gave me everything. There are lots of countries I could have grown up in and gone no place, right? You know, my father used to say to me all the time, if you want to grow up and not live in public housing, when you grow up, you better pay attention in school. That was all the family involvement we had. And I understood because I hated living in public housing because when my parents had a fight, everybody in my building could hear it because the pipes run through the building, so there's no privacy, right? So I hated that. And the one thing I knew is when I had fights, I wanted to have them in private when I grew up.
All right, we are just about out of time. And Joel, I know that you have to be on the move here. So final.
Why don't we hear from the dean?
Absolutely,
Yeah. Do you
yes.
have any thought about all this? What were your reflections?
That's what we call a cold call.
Well, gee, I'm in awe of Joel Klein, and he knows that, because, I mean, we were sitting here after your opening comments. It is extremely rare when you have somebody speak about their practice with such authenticity, and also I'm just impressed by the strategy. I'm impressed by the bravery, and a lot of it I would like to share it too. I mean, I'm impressed by your sharing of your personal story. Mine is somewhat similar, actually. Not public housing, but father with a 10th grade education, worked in a factory and hated it. Luckily, he was 1 for 2 because he was married to my mother. But same story. I don't know what Stacey's is, but it's what gets me up every day. Is I was really lucky to live in a country where it's possible to get financial aid and go to college. Not everybody is that lucky, and that's what motivates me. I'm hoping you motivated not just some of the wonderful students from the Ed School, but some of the other students in this room to think about a career in education. Because, we say this all the time at the Ed School. I spent the first 18 years of my career in 2 psychology departments, including here. I would never go back to a psychology department because it really is about ego there. My research, my papers, my this. But when you're in education, you just wake up every day knowing you're doing the Lord's work, and you never think twice about it. I guess the other thing I'd like to say, I envy you the opportunity that you're having with this 3rd term. This group might like to know that the average superintendent lasts something like 3 years, and therefore there's no strategy that has an opportunity to take hold. So we're expecting great things from you,
Chancellor, final thoughts for this group.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for the energy is real. I feel it and I appreciate it. What the dean just said is important, and certainly New York is a place to do it. If you came to Tweed Courthouse and looked at the people who are working there now, you would not believe it. I mean, we have more MBAs, more lawyers, more people from lots of different fields, lots of educators. But one of the things that what we're about is being a magnet for talent, and the opportunity you get, while the pay is not as good, the opportunity you get in terms of your individual responsibility, your chance to grow, and to be part of something that people really feel passionate about. So come to New York City.